Hey guys, Mr. Price here with your next chapter of the Cay. Actually, today it's going to be two chapters because chapter 6 is very short. So, where we left off, Philip and Timothy were just kind of floating along, and they thought they heard a boat, and they clamored for it. They tried to find it, and Timothy lit a torch, but the boat disappeared without a trace. Philip began asking Timothy to describe the things that he was seeing, and you kind of got this feel of, and the author explicitly told you that Timothy was becoming Philip's eyes. Just another kindness that Timothy is providing on a list that's already growing. Here we go, chapter 6. In the early morning, I knew it was early because the air was still cool and there was dampness on the boards of the raft. I heard Timothy shout, "I see an island! True!" In wild excitement, I stumbled up and fell overboard. I went under the water, yelling for him, then came up, gasping. I heard a splash and knew he was in the water, too. Something slapped against my leg, and I thought it was Timothy. I knew how to swim, but didn't know which way to go, so I was treading water. Then I heard Timothy's frightened roar, "Sharks!" and he was thrashing about near me. He grabbed my hair with one hand and used his other arm to drag me back toward the raft. I had turned on my face and was trying to hold my breath. Then I felt my body being thrown, and I was back on the boards of the raft, gasping for air. I knew that Timothy was still in the water because I could hear splashing and cursing. The raft tilted down suddenly on one side. Timothy was back aboard, panting. He bent over me. He yelled, "Damn fool, man! I told you about the shark!" I knew Timothy was in a rage. I could hear his heavy breathing and knew he was staring at me. "Shark all around us, all the time!" he roared. I said, "I'm sorry." Timothy said, "On this raft, you crawl, young boss. You hear me?" I nodded. His voice was thick with anger. But in a moment, after he took several deep breaths, he asked, "You all right, young boss?" I guess he sat down beside me to rest. His breathing was still heavy. Finally he said, "Men die quick out there." We'd both forgotten about the island. I said, "Timothy, you saw an island." He laughed. "Yes, the island. There it is." I said, "Where?" Timothy answered scornfully, "There, look, man, look." Angrily, I said to him, "I can't see." He kept forgetting that. His voice was low when he said, "Yes, young boss, that be true. In all this harassment with the shark, I did forget." Then I felt his hands on my shoulders. He twisted them. "That direction, young boss." Straining to look where he had pointed me, I asked, "Are there any people on it?" "'Tis a very small island, outrageous low." I repeated, "Are there any people on it?" I thought they could contact my father and then send for help. Timothy answered honestly, "No, young boss, no people. People not be living on the island that has no water." No people? No water? No food? No phones? It was not any better than the raft. In fact, it might be worse. "How far away are we?" "About 2 mile," Timothy said. "Maybe we should stay on the raft. A schooner will see us, or an airplane." Timothy said positively, "No, we better off on land, and we driftin' that way. The tide be running with us." He was happy. He wanted to be off the sea. I was certain my father had planes and ships out looking for us. I said, "Timothy, the Navy is searching for us." "I know." Timothy did not answer me. He just said, "'Tis a pretty thing, to be sure. I see a white beach, and behind that, low sea grape bushes. Then, on the hill, some palm, maybe 20, 30 palm." I was sure he couldn't even see that far. I said, "Timothy, wouldn't it be better if we stayed on the raft and found a big island with people on it?" He ignored me. He said, "Biden the night, I saw surf washing white over banks off to port, but did not awaken you, young boss, but knew we'd be getting near the Cays. I said, I don't want to go on that island. I don't think there was anyone on earth as stubborn as old Timothy. There was steel in his voice when he answered, we be going on dat island, young boss. Dat be true. But he knew how I felt now, because he added, from this island we will get help. Be true. I swear. Chapter 7. It seemed hours, but it was probably only one until Timothy said, do not be alarmed now, young boss. I'm going to jump into the water and kick this raft to the shore. Without that, we'll pass the island by and by. In a moment I heard a splash on one side of the raft, and then Timothy's feet began drumming the water. I guess he was not afraid of sharks this close in. Soon he yelled, bottom, young boss, bottom! His feet touched sand. In another few minutes, the raft lurched, and I knew it had grounded. I listened for sounds from shore, hoping there would be a cheerful, hello! But there were none. Just the wash of the low surf around the raft. Timothy said, here, young boss, on my shoulders, and I'll fetch you to the land. He helped me to his back. I said, don't forget Stew Cat. He laughed back heartily. One at a time, young boss. With me on his back, he splashed ashore, and judging from the time it took, the raft wasn't very far out. Then he lifted me down again. Len, he shouted. The warm sand did feel good on my feet, and now I was almost glad that we wouldn't have to spend another night on the hard, wet boards of the raft. He said, touch it, young boss. Feel the land. 'Tis outrageous good. I reached down. The grains of sand felt very fine, almost like powder. Timothy said, 'tis a beautiful Cay, this Cay. Never have I seen this Cay. Then he led me to sit under a clump of bushes. He said, you rest easy while I pull the raft more out of the water. We must not lose it. I sat there in the shade, running sand through my fingers, wondering where, among all those many islands in the Caribbean, we were. Timothy shouted up from the water, many fish here, langosta too. I be knowing, we roast them. Langosta, I knew, was the native lobster, the one without claws. I heard Timothy splashing around down by the surf and knew he was pulling the raft up as far as he could get it. A moment later, puffing hard, he flopped down beside me. He said, catch me breath, then I will tour the island and select a place for the camp. He put Stew Cat into my lap. Camp? I asked. Stroking Big Stew, Timothy replied, we may be here 2-3 days, so we be living comfortable. He could tell I was discouraged because we had come to the island and there were no people on it. He said confidently, we be rescue, true. Before the night, I build a great fire pile of brush and wood, so the next aircraft that fly over, we set it off. Where are we, Timothy? Near Panama? He answered slowly, I cannot be sure, young boss. Not very sure. But you said you knew about the banks and the cays that are out near the banks. I wondered if he knew anything, really. Timothy said, listen, I know that many banks and cays are around 15 north and 80 long. There is Roncador and Serrano, Quitosueno and Serrania and Roseland. Then there is Beacon and North Cay. Off to the west somewhere is Providencia and San Andreas. He paused a moment and then said, far, way up there, I think, is the Caymans, and then Jamaica. But you're not sure of this island. Timothy answered gravely, true, I'm not sure. Do the schooners usually come close by here? I asked. Again, very gravely. Timothy said, the man who fishes follows the fish. Certainly the fish be here. I be seen with my own self eyes. I kept feeling that Timothy was holding something back from me. It was the tone of his voice. I'd heard my father talk that way a few times. Once, when he didn't want to tell me that my grandfather was about to die. Another time was when a car ran over my dog in Virginia. Of course, both times happened when I was younger. Now my father was always honest with me, I thought, because he said that in the end, that was better. I wished Timothy would be honest with me. Instead, he got up to take a walk around the quay, saying he'd be back in a few minutes. Then Stucat wandered away. I called to him, but he seemed to be exploring too. Realizing that I was alone on the beach, I became frightened. I knew how helpless I was without Timothy. First, I began calling for Stucat, but when he didn't return, I began shouting for Timothy. There was no answer. I wondered if he'd fallen down and was hurt. I began to crawl along the beach and ran head-on into a clump of low-hanging brush. I sat down again, batting at gnats that were buzzing around my face. Something brushed against my arm, and I yelled out in terror, but I heard a meow, and I knew it was only Stucat. I reached for him and held on tight until I heard brush crackling and sang out, "Timothy?" "Yes, young boss," he called back from quite a distance. When he was closer, I said harshly, "Never leave me again! Don't you ever leave me again!" He laughed. "There is nothing to fear here. I walked round the whole island, and there is nothing but sea grape, sand, a few little lizard, and those palm tree." I repeated, "Never leave me alone, Timothy." "All right, young boss, I promise," he said. Sorry, I got a little Russian on that one. He must have been looking around, for he said, "No water here, but 'tis no problem. We have water in the keg, and we will trap more on the first rain." Still believing he wasn't telling me everything, I said, "You were gone a long time." He answered uneasily, 30 minutes at most. The island is about 1 mile long and a half wide, shaped like the melon. I found a place to make our camp up near the palm. To be a good place for a lookout. The rise is about 40 feet from the sea." I nodded. "I'm hungry, Timothy." We were both hungry. He went back to the raft, took out the keg of water and the tin of biscuits and chocolate. While we were eating, I said, "You're worried about something, Timothy. Please tell me the truth. I'm old enough to know." Timothy waited a long time before answering, probably trying to choose the right words. Finally, he said, "Young boss, there is, in this part of the sea, a few little cays like this one, surrounded on both sides by humbug banks. They are cut off from the rest of the sea by these banks." I tried to make a mental picture of that. Several small islands tucked up inside great banks of coral that made navigation dangerous was what I finally decided on. "You think we're on one of those cays?" "Maybe, young boss, maybe." Fear coming back to me, I knew he'd made a mistake in bringing us ashore. I said, "Then no ships will pass even close to us, not even schooners. We're trapped here. We might live here forever," I thought. Again, he did not answer directly. I was beginning to learn he had a way of being honest while still being dishonest. He said, "The place I'm thinking of is called the Devil's Mouth. 'Tis a U-shaped thing, with these sharp coral banks on either side, running maybe 40, 50 mile." He let that sink in. It sounded bad. But then he said, "I do hope, young boss, that I am outrageous mistaken. If we are in the Devil's Mouth, how can we be rescued?" I asked angrily. It was his fault we were there. "The fire pile. When the aircraft fly above, they will see the smoke and fire." "But they might just think it's a native fisherman. No one else would come here." I could picture him nodding, thinking about that. Finally he said, "True, but we cannot fret about it, can we? We'll make camp and see what happens." He poured me a half cup of water, saying happily, "Since we have made land, we can celebrate." I drank it slowly and thoughtfully. What do you think Philip's thinking right there? On this island that he didn't want to come to, and that character action that the author gives us there at the very end. I drank it slowly and thoughtfully. What's he thinking about? I hope you guys enjoyed the chapters today. Remember to fill out your exit ticket and have a great day. Bye.